Welcome back. You're listening to the panel discussion, Capitalizing on Cloud, Transforming Government IT, sponsored by Juniper Networks on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm your moderator, Jason Miller. My guests are Joe Klimovich, the Justice Department's Chief Information Officer, Doug Nash, the Agriculture Department's Deputy Chief Information Officer, Christine Calvosa, the Federal Communication Commission's Deputy Chief Information Officer, and Tim Solms, the U.S. Federal Managing Director of Worldwide Government at Juniper Networks. Now I want to pick back up where Tim left off, network disruption. It's the only thing that hasn't been disrupted yet in the whole world. No, I know he didn't mean that. But let me turn to Joe a little bit, because network disruption, I think he makes a great point. And talk a little bit about that idea of network disruption. Are you disrupting your network, or are you just still at the low-hanging fruit when it comes to cloud, or both?
Well, Jason, I don't think you can talk about moving to the cloud without talking about the network. And I think I would throw cybersecurity in there as well, because your security needs to be built into that network. So at Justice, we're looking at both the network and security, along with the cloud roadmap and cloud strategy. And we're really looking at implementing a collection of security capabilities at various levels in the network. And I'll just start off by talking about cloud access points that are connecting our networks and our core data centers that are on-prem to trusted cloud providers, and trying to do that one time for the entire department, trying to do it so that there's no bottlenecks going out to those cloud providers. And we're proofing or prototyping these concepts, building out these capabilities. Been certainly coordinating with DHS to make sure that we don't miss something. But again, we want to do it one time and build out a very robust network to the cloud providers, but make sure that security is built in there.
Let me jump in real quick, just so I be clear. So when you talk about a cloud access point, we have trusted internet connections. You've got the mandate from OMB to reduce your attack surface, number of internet access points. This is above and beyond a tick.
So in my perspective, and what we've seen is that if you go through ticks out to the cloud, you end up with bottlenecks. And if you think about it, it's not truly the internet. It is a secure environment in a commercial facility. So what we're doing is figuring out what do we need to build in from a security perspective, both at the cloud service provider, but along with our network as well, so that we're not taking any shortcuts, but we're doing things smartly. And if we go out to the internet, either through the cloud provider or through one of our own domains, we go through the entire tick stack. And so we've got all that covered, but it requires really taking a step back and figuring out how do you build in the right security controls so that you don't impact operations, so that you allow really a super highway out to the cloud providers. And it's continuous monitoring, it's intrusion detection, but again, key to this, I think, is really minimizing the number of interfaces you have out to your cloud service providers, and then building that entire stack. So it's a big job. We're not going to be done anytime soon, but I think it's one that will best enable the mission.
Doug, let me turn to you at USDA. Are you guys also looking at that network disruption? And then if so, talk a little about how.
Yeah, we're taking a very similar approach to Department of Justice. It's interesting if you look at kind of our evolution of cloud across USDA. We had individual agencies that were getting their cloud services, getting their network connectivity by going through the TIC, which, like Joe said, is one of the least efficient ways to do it, or having individual cloud application direct circuits. And so what we're looking at is putting a cloud exchange capability in place where we aggregate, build a single network interface, that cloud secure, where a select group of cloud providers can connect through that, and then it makes it far easier for agencies to get access to those cloud services. And we also did just cost analysis, and the cost of going through the TIC versus setting up this cloud exchange, TIC being the most expensive, this cloud exchange is far more cost effective as well. And we're tying this into our the overall EIS federal government network modernization effort that should be awarded, I think, in early 2017. We want to actually modernize our entire network, moving from 17 networks to quote unquote a single USDA network that supports cloud.
From your words to the truth, because I know that your CIO, Jonathan Album, I talked to him earlier in the summer, and that was major priority for him. And I know before him, several CIOs have tried that same thing.
Right.
So I know EIS is playing a big role. Christine, let's talk a little bit about what you guys have done with the network. I mean, yours is, I would say, very much disrupted just based on Operation Server Lift.
Right. So we, I think we started a year ago in September with the move to the new data center. And that was a complete way of looking at how we had architected the network at the beginning and what we're doing now. To add to what both Joe and Doug are saying is that we have started to look at we have actually begun bringing in services and enhancing our security stack, because just like in the network stack, we really are looking at enhancing the security stack, and we have, similar to the concept to what Doug talked about, the cloud exchange, we are doing the same thing with that security stack. And we are actually working with our telecom partners and actually challenging them to actually help us with that one method, one way overall enterprise solution, so that we don't have to have 20 million connections and 20 million directions. And so we are very much looking forward to putting in place what we call this new security stack and services that we have, and really looking at the network piece as part of that. And so we are eager to kickstart that in the next year. We've actually done a lot of the procurement now. It's really now putting a lot of it in place.
Tim, let me step back. We delved into security, and we can talk about security for a long time. And I think, there's, as Joe said, you can't talk one without the other, without a doubt. But when you're talking about disruption, give me the broader sense of disruption as you see it.
So disruption to me is how are we doing every part of building out this capability? And that really looks at how are we handling acquisition systems, how are we looking at implementation, the human capital piece of that, right? So are we looking at the right ways to do that, or are we controlled by what is the education of training of the people that we have in very cold rooms where they've studied for the last 20 years? And I think we're at a point right now, and some of the forcing functions are clearly things around security, clearly things around cost of doing business, and changes in the workforce or changes in expectations of the workforce that say, hey, we have to go in and do some of those uncomfortable things, even when the people that have been on board are well versed in one particular area or another. That drives us to more open systems. So when we get into open systems that say we're going to have a heterogeneous environment no matter what part of that is going forward, it tells the CIOs of the world, it tells the operators of the world, let's focus on critical capability. And then come back to me and say, how are you going to get us to that capability? How are you going to architect that to meet those standards versus we have spec'd out the 15,000 components that we want to do to put together this particular capability.
Christine, let me turn back to you for a second. Considering the fact that you guys have moved so much to the cloud and did over the last year, the issues that Tim brings up, the acquisition piece and the workforce piece, are two big ones. Security, I think, again, we could talk more about, but let me just look at that from a workforce perspective. How big of a change was this from a workforce perspective for FCC?
It's a big change. So culturally, I think it's a big change for many people, because we have started to actually implement and modernize at a quicker pace. And a lot of the staff is not ready, not used to actually getting that done. A lot of it has to do with the level of support, the level of participation, the level of education and training, not only just for the IT staff, right, because we're changing the paradigm and we're shifting from the old way of legacy building to a new way, and that's a paradigm shift in itself for the IT folks, but then really focused on bringing in the business and the mission critical areas so that they fully understand what we're moving to, why we're doing it, how it benefits them. I think for us, it's been a true partnership between IT and the business areas to get this done.
Tim, when you talk about disruption, it's easy to talk about by routing, not routers, by you had it better than I can remember right now. But really, we're talking about disruption of the workforce and the view of how CIOs are viewing their network. I mean, that's where you're getting to.
I am, and I like what Christine just said. It is a cultural shift, and that's not something that the federal government has historically done well. And I think we recognize that. That's not an accusation. That's a recognition that we are a policy-driven business as opposed to commercial businesses that say we're going to make the best decision based on X. So within policy, within regulations, within security models, how are we able to tackle some of those tough things? And very, very culturally disruptive.
Yeah, really interesting conversation because the cultural change and workforce impacts I think are significant. We're tackling it as well in USDA. And in USDA we have a enterprise data center, our National Information Technology Center, which provides on-premise private cloud infrastructure service and platform as a service. And one of the things we're doing with that workforce and just our IT workforce in general is how to build a brokering skill set and capability where that group is a trusted advisor and can direct customers to the appropriate cloud solution, with commercial being the first option. And so it's a bit of a cultural change. I think some initial resistance, but I think it's going well now. And also just building skills in the workforce around solution architecture for cloud, how to advise customers on what to consider, what to choose, even how to manage a cloud portfolio contracting. And then of course the networking folks and having them see this isn't a threat, but it's actually an opportunity.
I like the idea of the brokering concept. I think in many ways you need people who understand networking, you need people who understand the technology, then they can work with the mission side. But I'm going to turn to Joe and put him on the spot here for a second. Joe, you've been in government for like 52 years or something, I think, yeah. Culture change, we hear it time and again. We heard it with the telephones. When we put a telephone in someone's desk, that's going to be a culture change. You give them a computer, the Wang green screens.
I remember the Wang.
I remember the Wang green screens. But is this the culture change once again conversation we've got to have, or is there something more happening?
Well, I think there's a couple of different aspects. I mean, there is a very strong technical aspect. I mean, you can't ignore the technical pieces that we discussed earlier, but I think what I'm seeing is in the CIO shops, you really need to get staff that have a strong business background. Contract management becomes key, and all those aspects. Being able to properly define SLAs and understand SLAs. I mean, essentially, you're not configuring servers anymore, but you're managing the work, and so you need to have a real good balance in your CIO organizations between the business side and acquisition and financial management, and then also the technical. When I look at what's inherently governmental, there's 5 things, and it's program management, it's financial and contract management, it's requirements prioritization, so you need to be able to figure out what's more important. But then the biggest one that most people I think overlook when they outsource technologies to commercial entities is somebody has to accept on behalf of the taxpayers the goods and services. And if you don't really understand how those services are being provisioned or whether you're actually getting what you paid for, that's a huge issue.
Do you get a sense, Joe, that change is what's difficult here when we talk cloud? It's not so much the technology. I mean, Tim could tell you all day how easy it is to move this to that. Christine will tell you how wonderful Operation Server Lift was, and she didn't have to sleep on the floor or anything for a weekend. But generally speaking, I mean, is that, again, to get the people to change their viewpoint is really what we're talking about here?
I think you can't communicate enough. I mean, we need to can't overlook the individuals. I mean, people that have grown up in these environments where they can go down the hall and configure servers and so on. But I think it's broader than that. I think we have a lot of applications, and the Department of Justice is a very diverse organization with a tremendous number of applications. And as Tim was saying earlier, that some of these applications have very low latency requirements. Now we can say that we should move away from those, or we should try to fix those or something, but that's where the network is very important. And my experience is as we start moving things further away from the IT staffs, they want to understand how the applications are going to perform. How is the mission going to be supported? And we have to be able to clearly articulate that. And I think we all have to take responsibility for working through the details and communicating.
Tim, I want to tag back to something you said at the very beginning of the conversation of the panel. When you're seeing meetings with the government folks, it's fewer or it's as many with contracting officers, but you're also seeing the mission side and the IT side.
Absolutely.
Does that seem to tell you that this disruption, and I know we're initially we're talking network disruption from a strictly technical perspective, but really what we've moved into the workforce discussion, does it tell you that disruption's happening outside the quote-unquote network?
Well, there are several factors in there, and again, we can talk about the forcing functions, but regardless of what agency, service, or command you're in, the federal government spent 15 years appropriately focused on warfighting, thereabout. And now we're at a place where it's saying, hey, it's time for us to continue our focus on the modernization, the security, and adjusting to what is a different threat. And in that process, simultaneously with that, that fiscal boot sort of standing on your neck, you're sitting there going, okay, I can no longer entertain, 55 different options. I've got to neck that down to what are the handful of people out there that are going to help us through this next decision. And that's where I often reflect back on the time that the country was asked to build out an army for World War II, and how do you do that? And do people show up with the right intent to support that critical action? And I'm seeing that trust factor or that re-engagement with the people that really own the requirements and the people that represent the field-based missions back in to say, we're going to toss around some ideas. We're going to brainstorm around how we're going to get there and not be limited by just the legal and contractual obligation to support the next RFP or information session.
Just real quick, Doug or Christine, I'll throw it to either one of you. The mission piece, how much is that playing into your discussions around cloud? Either one, Doug?
Well, it's huge because, ultimately, we're doing all this to enable and support the mission. And so, and the mission is really driving rapid adoption of the cloud because of the just kind of deferred requests to IT. And they're looking at any way they can get quick capabilities to support their emerging needs. What I see is they tend to be very innovative in the kinds of solutions they want, and we traditionally haven't been able to keep up internally. And so, yeah, they've been a huge driver of it.
All right. Yeah. Quick, 10 seconds. Put you on speed round.
So I think for us, it's what's breeding success is we show success, and it breeds more success, and they tell other folks in the other bureaus and offices, and that's really what the driving force is for us.
The word of mouth is so important and success is right. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We can come back. We're going to continue this conversation about success in the cloud. You're listening to the panel discussion, Capitalizing on the Cloud, Transforming Government IT, sponsored by Juniper Networks on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.